Renanim. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Cobbs Corner. If this is your first time listening to Cobbs Corner, welcome, and to my returning listeners, welcome back. In this episode, we're going to be starting a new review series. We're going to be going through the American Film Institute's 100 greatest American films of all time. There's 100 of these movies, so this will be a long-term review series, and it's got the likes of, I'll read just the first 10, Citizen Kane, The Godfather, Casablanca, Raging Bull, Singin' in the Rain, Gone with the Wind, Lawrence of Arabia, Schindler's List, Vertigo, and The Wizard of Oz. So a lot of these movies I haven't seen. Very few movies on this list I've actually watched, and there's even fewer on this list that I've actually reviewed already. So we're going to be reviewing all 100 of these movies, and for the movies that are based on novels or based on short stories, those will be pushed back to later reviews. So I'm not going to be doing them in order. I'm going to, if the movie's based on a novel, I'm going to read the novel first and then watch the movie and review it, so I can compare and contrast, the movie versus the novel. But we're definitely going to be reviewing some classic films. Most of these films are before my time. Today's episode will be Citizen Kane, a movie that's before all of our times. Citizen Kane, this movie came out in 1941. It's, as of the recording of this podcast, it is 82 years old. And, 1941, it's a classic, and that's what we'll be getting into today. So, a little bit of an introduction. Following the death of publishing tycoon Charles Foster Kane, reporters scrambled to uncover the meaning of his final utterance, Rosebud. Storyline. A group of reporters are trying to decipher the last word ever spoken by Charles Foster Kane, the millionaire newspaper tycoon, Rosebud. The film begins with a newsreel detailing Kane's life for the masses, and then from there, viewers are shown flashbacks from Kane's life. As the reporters investigate further, the viewers see a display of a fascinating man's rise to fame, and how he eventually fell off the top of the world. This movie is directed by Orson Welles, written by Herman J. Mankiewicz, Orson Welles, and John Houseman. Stars Orson Welles, Joseph Cotten, and Dorothy Comingore. So this movie is written and directed by Orson Welles. Also stars Orson Welles. So, without any further ado, let's go to Cobbs Corner. So as I stated in the introduction, the movie follows the death of publishing tycoon Charles Foster Kane. Some of the highlights of this movie, the movie's about 2 hours long, and some of my favorite parts include, there's a scene where we get a flashback of how when Kane was a child, he was like, I don't know, maybe 10 years old. He was living in the Midwest, and then his parents had given him over to an investor who was to be his legal guardian, and pretty much made him heir to a huge fortune that he came into, a huge sum of money that he came into at the age of 25, and then he used all that money to then go and buy up the publishing companies, the New York Inquirer. So he went into the newspaper, the newspaper business, and from there he went and bought up a bunch of the competition and became very well known, not only in the news in the news publishing business, but then also in the world of radio and just in business in general. And yeah, Charles, C.F. Kane, or Charles Foster Kane, he just became he just rose to fame, not overnight, but over time, going from newspaper tycoon to a bit of a, I don't want to say socialite, but he had one of the more public private lives. He had been, as I said in News on the March, the newsreel, in the wake of his passing, that he was thrice married and twice divorced. And his first wife was the nephew of a president, was the niece, my bad. His first wife was the president at the time's niece. And folks are saying how if she keeps it up, she will no longer be a president's nephew. She'll no longer be a president's niece. She'll be a president's wife. So we see CF Kane rise to power, and it's interesting the way that this movie is framed. It's like there's a lot of like back and forth. It's like sort of, so there's a lot of like flashback sequences. It's like they go back and forth between, like, I guess the present, whereas like, okay, now that Charles Foster Kane has died, now let's go back in time, and we see his life through the lens of like his childhood best friend, of his publishers, of his ex-wife, Susan Alexander, who was his second wife, and we see how his relationship with his second wife, like she had sort of half jokingly said that she wanted to be a singer, so then he goes out of his way to make sure that she's a singer, and as one character put it, that he did it all for love. He just wanted other people to love him, and that's why he got into politics eventually. He went from being one of the biggest news publishers in the United States to then running for governor in the state of New York, and pretty much publicly sort of calling out the current governor at that time, and him claiming to be a man for the people, claiming to be a man who's going to fight for the underpaid, for the underrepresented man, for the working man, and so, but he made no shortage of enemies. He made no shortage of enemies in the press, and then eventually the governor came after him, and the day before the election, news dropped that he was involved in some love triangle with the governor's wife, and then he ended up not winning the election. So if I were to compare like a lot of the back and forth to another movie, it would be maybe Snowden by Oliver Stone, which is a movie I've actually been meaning to review Snowden. But Snowden, which is a movie that I watched in high school with, I just want to give him his flowers, Mr. Maroney. Shout out to Mr. Maroney, Engineering and Science University Magnet School. This was spring 2017, Intro to Film Studies. Snowden by Oliver Stone, and in that movie there's a lot of like back and forth between like Snowden in the hotel room in Hong Kong, being interviewed by the journalists at The Guardian, and then flashbacks to 2008 and 2010 and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of like back and forth. And I realized that this movie did come out in the 1940s. As I said in the intro, it is 82 years old. So there's that time period, I guess, sort of like recency bias that we would have today. It's like I feel like today we're used to movies being like the first act, like coming straight out of the gate, being like really just high energy and like fast paced, and that's not this movie. That is not this movie. This movie it's I'll admit it's not like a knock your socks off movie, although I mean AFI did put it as the greatest film of all time, and I can see why. It's because of the writing, it's because of the directing, it's because of the recurring word that comes up throughout the movie, Rosebud, which was his last word uttered on earth. That was his dying word was Rosebud. So we see how, yeah, Rosebud was his last word spoken on Earth, and we see how all the journalists who have broken the story that Kane has died, they are the ones who go and interview all these people from Kane's past. Like I said, his second wife, his publishers, a few of his colleagues, a few of his childhood friends, and with the common goal in mind of finding like Rosebud, like what was Rosebud, and it's nice that we get to see Kane's life through the lens of those that he was survived by, and I think that's why this movie's a classic. That's why 82 years later you've got podcasters like myself reviewing this movie, and I think it's because of the writing. It's because of the writing, the acting, and the fact that Orson Welles like really pushed for the movie to get made. The DVD copy of it that I have, there's the DVD copy of this movie that I got. It has a second disc that is the documentary The Fight for Citizen Kane, which, now this is not a review of that documentary, so I haven't watched that documentary in preparation for this review or anything, but I'm definitely like after seeing this movie, I definitely have to go and watch that documentary and see like with post-production and behind the scenes like what's going on, because like because this movie, I mean, Orson Welles, he's such a presence in this movie. Everybody's such a presence in this movie. Everybody is just actually acting and giving 100%, and the majority of the cast were first-time actors too. So I think that's another reason why this movie is such a classic. And throughout the movie, there's again that term Rosebud, which we then find out at the very end of the movie that apparently like Rosebud was the name of the sled company, I think, like as they were like burning his like childhood sled, the word Rosebud was on it. But we saw how he was on top of the world. It seemed like he was on top of the world, and then he lost it all. Like he was on top of the world, and then he bought a giant castle in Florida. Brought a giant castle, which bared the same name as the castle that Kublai Khan had. Starts with an X. Maybe the name was probably going to come up in the trivia portion, but he bought this giant castle and then had a private zoo and had this giant palace like all to himself, and just became a recluse. It became a recluse to the point where his either second or third wife started complaining about how all he does is buy her stuff with money, and all he does is like do things that he thinks are going to make her like him and love him and appreciate him, and he doesn't do anything out of the goodness of his own heart, and he has again become a recluse. And he says how like, oh, I thought you said you always wanted to live in a palace, and then she says like, I want to get out of Florida. I'm tired of Florida. I want to go to New York. We're cut off from the rest of the world. It could get boring when you don't have anybody to talk to, and so yeah, that's pretty much what happened to Charles Foster Kane. He's a man who had it all and then lost it all. And all he had to say when it was all said and done, when his time was up, all he had left to say was Rosebud. So overall, I give this movie solid 9 out of 10. Yep, 9 out of 10. Like I said, this movie's a classic. This movie does deal with themes of remembrance and remembrance, as well as like legacy, and they dive a bit into relationship as well. And we see how Citizen Kane, he was this really like rich tycoon who maybe wasn't the best husband and father or lover, and so he left behind 2 ex-wives and a bunch of colleagues who had kind of average things to say about him. He wasn't really remembered as like the nicest person or as like the best like individual, like just to be around in general. So I think what we can learn from Orson Welles and Citizen Kane is that character matters, and the fact that you have no control who lives, who dies, who tells your story. Yes, I made a Hamilton reference. Shout out to Backlook Cinema, the podcast, in his review of Alien. I can't think of the podcast, but it's like a couple. It's like a husband and wife who does who have their own podcast. They were guests on the Backlook Cinema episode. It was a recent episode. They reviewed Alien, and one of the members of the couple that has the podcast, they said how like early on in the podcast they were gonna have a Hamilton reference every episode. I'm sure this is not the first Hamilton reference I've made in the history of Cobbs Corner, but I just feel like it was apt. Like it just kind of I had to slide that one in there. So, but yeah, you have no control over who lives, who dies, and who tells your story. You have no control over how you're remembered once you have transitioned. Those who survive you, they're the ones who will tell your story. They're the ones who tell your story. They are the they're the ones who tell your story. You have no control over what they say, over how they remember you. So it's important to, while we're all here on this earth, and I kind of touched on this a bit in my Change Your Life series, so go check out that review series. Maybe my Groundhog Day review. I said how like it's important to cultivate relationships and to be the kind of person who people want to be around, not just at work, but that people can depend on you. People feel like they can go and like go grab coffee together. You guys can go out for drinks, go grab dinner. To build relationships and to be the kind of person who's not a control freak and who's not difficult to work with. Like, I know that's been said about 1 million people in Hollywood, even 1 million people like in various industries. I mean, people said the same thing about Steve Jobs, R.I.P., that he was difficult to work with, that he would have these outbursts when he didn't get his way. And so, Citizen Kane can teach us all the importance of character, the importance of building a legacy worth remembering, living a life worth remembering, and therefore building a legacy, and also, again, like I said, character. And I will leave you with a quote from Bruce Lee. I'm sure this is not the first Bruce Lee quote that I've said on Cobb's Corner, but Bruce Lee said, "The key to immortality is first living a life worth remembering." Okay, on to Citizen Kane Plus, onto IMDb. So, in the awards category, Citizen Kane was nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars in 1942. And Orson Welles was nominated for Best Actor in a Leading Role at the 1942 Oscars, or 1942 Academy Awards. Oscars. Orson Welles was also nominated for Best Director at the 42 Academy Awards. Herman J. Mankiewicz and Orson Welles won the Oscar for Best Writing and Original Screenplay at the 42 Oscars. There's a little spiel. On Friday, July 19th, 2003, Orson Welles' Oscar statuette went on sale at an auction at Christie's in New York, but was voluntarily withdrawn so the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences could buy it back for just $1. The statuette, included in a large selection of Welles-related material, was going to be sold by Beatrice Welles, the youngest of the filmmaker's three daughters and the sole heir of his estate, and was expected to sell at over $300,000. So that statuette that Orson Welles won for Best Writing and Original Screenplay would have sold for over $300,000 20 years ago. I do not have an inflation calculator in front of me. I mean, this was 2003, so 20 years later, I do not know what that value would be today. But it's a ton of money, Orson Welles. Greg Toland was nominated for Best Cinematographer, Black and White, at the 1942 Oscars. Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films USA. Citizen Kane was nominated. It was a 2012 nominee for Best DVD/Blu-ray Special Edition release for the 70th Anniversary Ultimate Collector's Edition at the 2012 nominee for the Saturn Award. Yep, the Saturn Award. So, wow, yeah, the 70th anniversary. At the Satellite Awards, Citizen Kane was a 2011 nominee for Best Classic DVD Ultimate Collector's Edition in 2011 at the Satellite Awards. It won the NBR Award. It won Best Film at the National Board of Review Awards, NBR Awards, in 1941. It won Best Film. It won Top 10 Films. It was a part of their Top 10 Films that same year, 1941 NBR Awards. George Coulouris won Best Acting at the NBR Awards in 41. And Orson Welles also won Best Acting at the 1941 NBR Awards. National Film Preservation Board, 1989, Orson Welles' Citizen Kane won the National Film Registry, so it is now on the National Film Registry for the National Film Preservation Board in the United States. Citizen Kane won the New York Film Critics Circle Award for Best Film, the NYFCC Award for Best Film in 1941. And Orson Welles won Best Director, was nominated for Best Director at the NYFCC Awards in 1941. Orson Welles was also nominated for Best Actor. At the 41 NYFCC Awards. Online Film Critics Society Awards. In 2002, Citizen Kane was nominated for the OFCS Award for Best Overall DVD. DVD Exclusive Awards. In 2001, Roger Ebert won Best Audio Commentary. He won the Video Premiere Award. Yep, the 2001 Video Premiere Award went to Roger Ebert for his audio commentary of Citizen Kane. Actually, come to think of it, I think that's actually the version of the DVD that I have includes Roger Ebert's audio commentary. Roger Ebert, if you're listening, I would love to have you here on Cobb's Corner. Yes, Roger Ebert, who is no longer with us. He died back in 2013. So, yeah, R.I.P. Would have loved to have had that man on this platform. Orson Welles won the OFTA, Online Film and Television Association, OFTA Film Hall of Fame in 2021. In 2021, Orson Welles won the OFTA Film Hall of Fame for character. Either the character Citizen Kane or Orson Welles was inducted into the OFTA Film Hall of Fame, Online Film and Television Association. Yeah. As Charles Foster Kane, the award was given posthumously. Right. Okay, so the award was given posthumously. Orson Welles as Charles Foster Kane, I see. 1997, Citizen Kane won the OFTA. Citizen Kane won Motion Picture at the OFTA Film Hall of Fame. At the Village Voice Film Poll in 1999, Citizen Kane won Best Film of the Century at the VVFP Awards. Village Voice Film Poll, Best Film of the Century, Best Film of the 20th Century. That is very high honor. It's probably one of the highest honors in film. Film of the Century. I mean, I can only imagine the film of the century at the end of the 21st century. I can only imagine what the nominees will be. Yeah. That's it for awards. On to trivia. Despite all the publicity, the film was a box office flop and was quickly co-signed to the RKO vaults. At the 1941 Academy Awards, the film was booed every time one of its 9 nominations was announced. It was only re-released to the public in the mid-1950s. Wow. I mean, I forgot to mention this in the intro, or in my actual review portion, like in my favorite parts and in my themes and analysis, but I completely forgot how this movie did not receive the kind of love and appraisal that it has today. I mean, all those awards we just went through, that was not the case in 1941 when this movie came out. It was it was a flop. People did not, and I feel like that's going to be a couple movies on this list. Like, they did not get good reviews at first, but then as time progressed, it then became a classic. It started to resonate with folks. Like I said, the first time you watch this movie, it is not a knock your socks off movie, okay? It's a movie you kind of gotta, maybe you need to watch it a few times, but the camera looks up at Charles Foster Kane and his best friend Jedediah Leland, and down at weaker characters like Susan Alexander Kane. This was a technique that Orson Welles borrowed from John Ford, who had used it 2 years previously on Stagecoach in 1939. Welles privately watched the movie about 40 times while making this film. I mean, that's a very conscious decision that Orson Welles, on Orson Welles' part, and that's a very, very crafty and clever way of filmmaking. So big props, not just to Orson Welles, but also to John Ford in the movie Stagecoach, which may or may not be on the list. I was not about to go read through 100 movies. I have them all written down, but not right now. The audience that watches Kane make his speech is, in fact, a still photo. To give the illusion of movement, hundreds of holes were pricked in with a pin, and lights moved about behind it. Wow. I feel like now that they mention that, that actually makes a ton of sense. It's a still photo. And then, again, give the illusion of movement. Telling you, man, that was... I feel like filmmakers of, like, the 20th century, filmmakers of, like, 50 plus years ago, like... And again, I kind of touched on this in my review when I was on Backlook Cinema little over a year ago, when I was on the Backlook Cinema podcast, and we talked about Rocky. I said how we take it for granted today with, like, visual effects. Like, I feel like if Citizen Kane were made today, it's like they wouldn't have to have a still photo and, like, poke holes in it. Like, they would just have, you know, extras, or they'd, you know, hire extras, or they'd have, you know, CGI. And we really take for granted how easy we have it today. It's like you look back at movies like Citizen Kane and you see how, like, these folks had to, like, hustle. It was not easy back then. Like, it was actually a struggle, and they paved the way for, you know, filmmakers of today. You know, the Spielbergs and the John Favreaus and the George Lucases and the J.J. Abrams and, you know, the Ron Howards. So yeah, I definitely appreciate this bit of trivia. Moving right along, the film's opening was just the title and no star names. And No Star Names was unprecedented in 1941. It is now the industry norm for Hollywood blockbusters. Yeah, you know, I remember, I think a lot of movies from that era, from, like, the 40s, even going into the 70s. Like, I was literally just watching Monty Python and the Holy Grail with my students last week. And I told them how, like, back in the 70s, they had all the credits at the start of the movie. It was like all the credits at the start and then again at the end. And then 1977, George Lucas, he started that trend of putting all the credits at the end of the movie, having just the title, and then the movie starts, put all the credits at the end. That is the industry norm. But it was guys like Orson Welles having just the opening title and no star names in 1941, and then George Lucas doing the same thing in 1977, the same thing that got him sued by the WGA and by the Directors Guild. And that's the reason he didn't direct Empire Strikes Back, because he had to literally make the film on his own, and he cut ties with those guilds. And so, but yeah, that was unprecedented. It was, like, frowned upon back in the 1940s, you know, just put the movie title and no star names, but that's normal today. So, times have changed. During filming, Orson Welles received a warning that William Randolph Hearst had arranged for a naked woman to jump into his arms when he entered his hotel room, and there was also a photographer in the room to take a picture that would be used to discredit him. Welles spent the night elsewhere, and it is unknown if the warning was true. Wow. Okay, so shoot. Now I'm really looking forward to checking out that documentary. You know, the fight for Citizen Kane, which I may or may not have to, like, I might have to do maybe a bonus episode on that documentary, because this trivia. It's like, okay, so Orson Welles was apparently being blackmailed by William Randolph Hearst. Like, wow. I mean, to this day, it's unknown if that warning was true. I guess, you know, we'll never know, because Orson Welles did not spend a night in that hotel. But, man. And especially back then, too. I mean, back then, 1941, shoot. There would be no Citizen Kane today if that were the case. But a different version of this story is told by Welles during the Orson Welles Story Part 1 in 1982. In this version, Welles says he was lecturing in Buffalo, unlikely to have occurred during the Kane production. He was warned by a Buffalo cop about a naked underage girl was waiting for him in his hotel room. For reference, the story begins about 33 minutes and 30 seconds into the Arena program. Oh, okay. So I see. There's some sort of, like, documentary, the Orson Welles Story, back in '82. right. So, yeah, it was okay. So yeah, it's unlikely that that Orson Welles would have been lecturing in Buffalo. And then apparently he was warned by a Buffalo cop about some naked underage girl that was waiting for him in his hotel room. But either way, Kane never went back to that hotel room, and thank God, because, otherwise this movie never would have happened, guys. So, yeah. Big ups to Orson Welles. He dodged the bullet. On to some goofs. In continuity, when Susan Alexander Kane is doing the jigsaw puzzle by the fireplace, in the first wide shot, it's clear that the puzzle is almost complete, but in a subsequent close-up, the puzzle has hardly been started. I feel like that's been pointed out in a million movies, like just trouble with like the blocking, and maybe they forgot what it looked like in the previous shot. So yeah, in a subsequent close-up shot, the puzzle has hardly even been started. At the first time on the opera house stage, just before Susan begins to sing, two men pass carrying a litter behind her twice. Yeah, I mean, they just pretty much, probably looped that same sequence and then just thought that nobody would pick up on it, but here we are. The jigsaw puzzle. Back to this jigsaw puzzle that Susan is putting together changes considerably between the shot where Kane walks into the large room and asks her what she's doing and the next cut where Kane is standing in front of the large fireplace. The amount of puzzle that she's completed increases greatly between the two shots. It is my headcanon that Susan was actually a sorceress, and that she between shots pulled out her magic wand and put together the puzzle herself, and she thought the viewers are not going to be able to pick up on this, the fact that I'm a sorceress. I don't know. When Kane is performing his rooster as a shadow show to Susan, his hands are not in the position they would be to cast the shadow as it appears. I picked up on that. I definitely picked up on that. I thought maybe it was like a duck or something, but wolf. When Mr. Thatcher has Mrs. Kane sign the contract at Mrs. Kane's boarding house, Mrs. Kane goes over to the closed window and opens it. In the first shot, the window could only be raised to the height of Mrs. Kane's shoulders, but in the second, it is above her head. I picked up on that. Although I couldn't tell if the window was open or closed to begin with, though, because it was like clear. So yeah. On to some factual errors. The Russian newspaper lists Charles' first initial as C. In Russian, the letter is pronounced S. There is another letter in Russian that looks like an upside down lowercase h that is pronounced CH. Either that letter or K for the Russian form Karl should have been used as his first initial. Right, so to my listeners, if I have any listeners in Russia, if I have any Russian-speaking listeners, feel free to, chime in the comments below. Let us know. Is this true? Because I do not speak Russian. Not yet. During the breakfast table sequence, Kane refers to the president as Emily's Uncle John. There is no president named John between Tyler, 1845 to 1850, and Kennedy. I picked up on that. Maybe they just used a fictional president, which is not uncommon in movies. They just use a fictional president, so that way, just to kind of keep things general so they don't get too into like politics, I guess. One of the posters advertising Susan Alexander's opera appearance shown in the newsreel misspelled her first name Susan with a Z, not a S. I mean, me personally, I would have kept it. I would have been like my stage name Susan with a Z, but my government name Susan with a S. Or it'll be like Johnny English Reborn. It's like the scene where they're on the plane and it's like, and Daniel Kaluuya's like, I don't think that's a Susan. To which then Johnny English, Rowan Atkinson says, it's not Susan, it's Shushan. He said something like, it's Shushan, not Susan. Incorrectly regarded as Goose. In the beginning, Kane says Rosebud. The nurse enters the room after the word is spoken. The shooting script only mentions Kane and the nurse being in the room. However, within the movie itself, Raymond the butler tells the reporter that he had heard Kane say Rosebud after the fight with Susan, as well as just before he drops the snow globe, implying that what the viewer is shown in that scene is from Raymond's point of view. I sort of kind of picked up on that, maybe. Okay, yeah. Within the movie itself, Raymond the butler tells the reporter that he had heard Kane say Rosebud. Okay, makes sense. We're going to reveal some mistakes. During the picnic scene towards the end, Wells had to shoot against a back projection because a location shoot was too costly and time-consuming. The stock footage used for the exterior was taken from King Kong, 1933. May or may not be on the list. Hence, on closer inspection, the four birds that fly by are in fact very definite pterodactyls. RKO told Wells to take the pterodactyls out of the shot, but he liked them and decided to keep them. Alright, again, you had to work with what you had. You gotta work with what you got. Sometimes, back then it was a struggle, getting movies made, on a budget. So yeah, stock footage from King Kong. Now I gotta check out King Kong. A movie that came out 8 years prior. After Kane's mother signs a contract for Thatcher, she stands up and seems to walk through the table on her way back to the window. This is due to the table being moved in order to create a continuous tracking shot from the front of the set where the table was to the back. Alright. Well, yeah, makes sense. They needed a tracking shot, so they had to move the table. And the table was probably moved and we didn't see it in the actual scene. When Leland and Bernstein are inspecting Kane's art purchases, Leland moves a statue which wobbles too quickly for it to be made of a dense stone such as marble. This is very, very true. Very, very true. The long dolly shot from outside the Kane house in Colorado and all the way back inside through 2 rooms, ending on the far side of a table, could not have been achieved with the table in place, and instead the table had to be moved into position once the camera was passed. It's an almost perfect illusion, except that the hat on the table is still wobbling slightly from the sudden movement by the time it comes into shot. I have no idea. I did not pick up on that at all, ever. Thank you, IMDb. In the aquarium, a wire holding the octopus is visible. I noticed that. Did you? You listening? Did you notice that? Let me know in the comments. Anachronisms. In the newsreel, the announcer states how a defaulting boarder had left the deed to a supposedly worthless mine, the Colorado Lode, to Mary Kane in 1868, then begins his next sentence 57 years later before a congressional committee, as the film cuts to an old newsreel of Thatcher testifying before the committee. 57 years after 1868 would be 1925, as talking pictures were at best still in the experimental stage and in any case not in use in 1925. It would not be realistic that the newsreel of Thatcher testifying before Congress would have sound. Similarly, the sequence immediately following Thatcher's testimony stated by the announcer as that same month in Union Square, depicting the radical speaker denouncing Kane, would also not have had sound. This is all very, very true. I know because I just finished rewatching Babylon for a third time before recording this podcast. That's all very, very true. Anachronisms. Audiovisual unsynchronized. When Jim Geddes reveals Kane's mistress to his wife, Geddes shouts to Kane, "We've got proof. It will look bad in the papers." Looking closely, he actually said, "It will look good in the papers." All right, yep. They probably had to edit that, switch good to bad, you know. At the end of her interview with the reporter Thompson, Susan Alexander Kane says, "Come around sometime and tell me the story of your life." But as she says this, her mouth is not moving. I think I might have picked up on that. When Kane shouts at Jim Geddes from the stairwell, it is clear that most of the words he is saying are not coming out of his mouth. True, very true. Yeah, because we don't see any mouth moving. All we hear is... We don't see mouth moving. All we hear is words. So they could just be coming from, like, God or... you know, they could just be coming from, like, the narrator who's, like, broken into the movie now. While standing at the large fireplace, Kane says to Susan, "I don't care to visit New York. The video of Kane's mouth movements is not synchronized with the audio." Man, I tell you, audio-visual synchronization, I feel like that's a lot of old movies, though. It's a lot of old movies, and it just kind of leaves things up to the imagination. So, it is what it is. Crew equipment visible. At the party scene where Kane dances with the girls, there are several shots of his reflection in the mirror. The camera shoots directly into the mirror, and its silhouette can be clearly seen. Good to know. There's a camera shadow on the large doors to the Thatcher vault as Thompson enters. Yep, camera shadow. And lastly, when Kane and Thatcher are having a heated discussion in the newspaper office, they both suddenly stand. A shadow of the camera is then visible on Thatcher's back. I tell you, man, you guys got to get all this camera equipment out of there. Make sure it's not invisible. Crew and equipment visible. Make sure it's not visible. Otherwise we're gonna point it out. All right. Let that be a lesson to the last of you. Make sure your equipment's not visible on camera. Character error. In the projection room after the news on the March reel, Joseph Cotton can clearly be heard saying, "Yeah, sure." I feel like I heard that. I picked up on that one. On to some quotes. Mr. Bernstein, "Old age, it's the only disease, Mr. Thompson, that you don't look forward to being cured of." Very true. And then Jedediah Leland, this was at the nursing home, or at the hospital. He says, "I can remember everything. That's my curse, young man. It's the greatest curse that's ever been inflicted on the human race. Memory." Mr. Bernstein, "A fellow will remember a lot of things you wouldn't think he'd remember. You take me. One day back in 1896, I was crossing over to Jersey on the ferry, and as we pulled out, there was another ferry pulling in, and on it there was a girl waiting to get off. A white dress she had on. She was carrying a white parasol. I only saw her for 1 second. She didn't see me at all. But I'll bet a month hasn't gone by since that I haven't thought of that girl." Impressive. Susan Alexander, I don't know many people. Kane, I know too many people. I guess we're both lonely. That's actually like one of my favorite lines in the movie. I know too many people. I guess we're both lonely. Kane, I don't think there's one word that can describe a man's life. Very, very true. Very, very true. All right. On to user review. See it for what it is. Okay, look, let me settle something between those who love and hate this film. A lot of people hail this film because it is technically brilliant and groundbreaking. Director Orson Welles did a lot of things visually that no one had ever done before. Nearly every filmmaker was in some way influenced by this movie. This movie also had a great impact in its time. The title character was based on media giant William Randolph Hearst. He was that generation's Donald Trump. He opposed this film so much he did everything in its power to stop its release and almost succeeded. Lastly, this film contains some of the strongest and most common themes in literature, life versus death. It is for these reasons why this film is so revered. On the contrary, people who hate this film mainly complain that it is boring, which is a legitimate complaint. The story is slow compared to today's standards, and there is no real Hearst character alive today in which to relate. So yes, the story on the surface is outdated. However, this does not make it a bad movie. It was not made as a Matrix/Star Wars type of movie which can be enjoyed at a surface level. This is not pure entertainment. Remember, there is more to film than storytelling. This film was designed to be cinematically beautiful and to tell a basic story of love and redemption. There is much more to the story than the thinly veiled attack on Hearst. One just needs to look deeper. Look at Shakespeare or Hawthorne, for example. Their literary works are universally loved, yet many people blow them off because they refuse to look past the outdated language into the beautiful prose and simple, ubiquitous themes. Just because something is outdated does not mean it lacks worth in today's world. My advice is those who did not like it the first time or have not seen it yet is simple. Watch it again for what it is. Do not expect to be on the edge of your seat for 2 hours. Watch it for the cinematography that alone makes this film among the best. I don't agree with the AFI's #1 ranking, but I think it still ranks high. Look deeper into the story and try to connect with it on some level. At the very least, appreciate how influential this film was and where the industry would be without it. If you can do this, then maybe some of the naysayers will change their minds. Again, you do not have to love Citizen Kane, but at least respect it for what it is. You know, honestly, I could have just like read that review and then just that could have been the episode, to be honest. This was from Gobo Socks on IMDb, and it was published April 21st, 2004. So this review is almost 20 years old. Yeah, I completely agree. The story is kind of slow. It is not a movie that can be it's not a movie that can be enjoyed with like on a surface level. It's not like Star Wars, it's not like The Matrix, it's not like any of the movies we got today, any of these big budget, Marvel movies that we usually talk about here on Cobbs Corner. So the movie's definitely a product of its time, and yeah, William Randolph Hearst, who we mentioned in the trivia portion, and yeah, the William Randolph Hearst. So it's kind of a product of its time, and it was revolutionary for that time period. Although again, it did not get great reviews initially, and then it was re-released in like the 1950s, and so. But yeah, I completely agree with this person. Take it for what it is. Do I agree with AFI putting this as #1? Probably not. I feel like, we got 99 other movies to watch after this one, so I feel like there's probably going to be some much, much better films than this one on this list. I guarantee you. But I think this movie should definitely be among the top 100 greatest films of all time. It was great in its time, and there's something to be learned. There's certain like timeless takeaways, timeless themes, sort of. So overall, this movie has an 8.3 out of 10 on IMDb and a 4.2 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd. So scores about the same, 8.3 out of 10, 8.3 out of 10, and 4.2 out of 5. So yeah, it's about the same score, math-wise. Yeah. Official details: the movie was released on September 5th, 1941 in the United States. It's an American movie. Apparently it has a Facebook. The movie's in English and Italian. It's also known as American. I guess outside the United States they maybe call this movie American instead of Citizen Kane. Filming locations: Busch Gardens, St. Grove Avenue, Pasadena, USA. The Xanadu Grounds. That was the name of the castle. Xanadu Grounds, although it's been demolished. Yes, S. Grove Avenue. Busch Gardens, Pasadena, California. Production companies: RKO Radio Pictures and Mercury Productions. Box office: it had an estimated budget of $839,727. Its gross domestic box office haul in the U.S. and Canada was $1,627,530, so about $1.6 million. So definitely made a huge profit at the box office, and its gross worldwide, it made, again, $1.6 million. Made only about a $1,645,944 worldwide, so only about another $18,000 worldwide. So the majority of that money was made at home in the U.S. and Canada, domestically. So, Rotten Tomatoes. Tomato meter score, 99%. It's a near perfect Rotten Tomatoes score. There's very few movies that have a 100% score on Rotten Tomatoes. I have no problem with them giving it 99%. Audience scored 90%. I'd give it maybe like a 97%. The critics' consensus: Orson Welles' epic tale of a publishing tycoon's rise and fall is entertaining, poignant, and inventive in its storytelling, earning its reputation as a landmark achievement in film. Where to watch? You can rent Citizen Kane on Amazon Prime Video, Apple TV, and Vudu, or buy it on Amazon Prime Video, Apple TV, or Vudu. Again, you guys know me. I'm old school. I watched it on DVD. So, yeah. You could also watch it on DVD, if you can find one. Well, that is all for today's review of Citizen Kane. If you like what you heard today, then don't forget to give us a review on your favorite podcast listening app, wherever you're listening for, preferably 5 stars, or to let us know what you guys thought of today's episode. If you got a movie or a movie series that you want me to review next, then all you got to do is hit me up on Instagram, TikTok, or Threads. I am going to start posting more on Threads. And you can also email me at cobbscornerpodcast@gmail.com. All that information is shown below. If you made it to the end of this episode, I greatly appreciate it. Be sure to turn on those post notifications so you get notified when I post. And tune in to Talk Time with Morgan Cobbs, Sunday mornings at 8 a.m. Chuk Standard Time, live on YouTube. Available everywhere else the next day. I hope you guys enjoyed your stay here at Cobbs Corner, and I'll talk to all of you in the next episode. Peace.